The piercing sound of sirens cut through the thick summer air, their echoes bouncing off the towering buildings of downtown Seattle. A crowd had already gathered at the edge of the park, their whispers frantic, their eyes darting towards the police perimeter. Somewhere in the chaos, a mother screamed, "Where is he? Where's my son?" The woman Sarah Mitchell was nearly collapsing in the arms of a police officer. Her 8-year-old son Noah had vanished, without a trace. 1 minute he was playing near the fountain, the next he was gone. And the entire city froze. It was happening again. 6 months ago, Richard Hale had been convicted of the most horrifying crime in recent history: the kidnapping and attempted murder of 7-year-old Emily Carter. His trial had dominated the news, and the evidence against him had seemed overwhelming. His fingerprints were all over the abandoned house where Emily had been found. His alibi was full of holes, and his DNA had been found on a piece of cloth used to gag the little girl. The public was convinced, the jury was convinced, the trial had ended with a guilty verdict, and Richard Hale had been sentenced to life in prison. So why had another child disappeared under identical circumstances? And if Hale was truly behind bars, then who had just taken Noah? Mitchell Jack Monroe leaned against the cold metal of his desk, staring at the missing person report. His gut twisted in that familiar way it always did when something wasn't right. He had been with the FBI for 15 years, handling some of the most disturbing cases imaginable. But this was something different. Richard Hale was in prison. The case was closed. And yet, Monroe had never been able to shake the feeling that they had missed something, some detail that had slipped through the cracks. There were too many things that didn't add up. First, there had been nothing incriminating on Hale's personal computer. No disturbing search history. No hidden files. No secret folders filled with evidence if Hale had truly been a serial predator. His digital footprint should have been riddled with clues. Instead, it was clean. Too clean. Then there was the timeline. Hale had no criminal history before Emily's disappearance. No known signs of violent behavior. No psychological red flags. He was just a middle-aged man who worked at a hardware store and lived alone in a modest apartment. He wasn't the type to mastermind a crime like this. And now, with another child missing, the question Monroe had been asking himself for months grew louder. Had they convicted the wrong man? Rex's ears perked up as Monroe passed by the K-9 training facility at FBI headquarters. The German Shepherd sat upright, his dark eyes following the agent's every move. He had been the key witness. If you could call a dog. A witness who had led authorities to Emily Carter. He had been the one to find her battered and terrified, hiding in that abandoned house. Now, he was something of a legend, a symbol of justice. Monroe had never been much of a dog person, but there was something about Rex that made him pause. Maybe it was the way the dog always seemed alert, always watching as if he could sense things. No one else could. It was just a hunch. But Monroe had learned to trust his instincts. Something about this case was off, and Rex knew it too. 2 days later, Monroe found himself walking through the outskirts of Seattle, where old crumbling buildings stood as reminders of a forgotten time. He was following a lead, a small one, but it was all he had. It had started with Rex on a routine patrol. The dog had suddenly stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse on the east side of town. His ears had flattened, his body tensed, and he had begun growling, low in his throat. Monroe had never seen him react that way before. So now, here he was, flashlight in hand, stepping over shattered glass and rusted metal as he pushed open the creaking door. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Something about this place felt wrong when Rose's eyes landed on the floor. A set of small footprints in the dust. Too small to belong to an adult fault. A child had been here, the hairs on the back of his neck. Rose. Richard Hale was in prison. So who the hell was still out there? The rain had started to fall light at first, then turning into a steady drizzle that coated the streets in a thin layer of moisture. Jack Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel. As he drove through the dimly lit alleys of East Seattle, his mind raced with possibilities. None of them comforting. The footprints inside the abandoned warehouse had confirmed his worst fear. A child had been there recently. And not just any child, based on the shoe size. It could very well be Noah Mitchell. But that wasn't the only thing that sent chills down his spine. The tired tracks in the alley behind the building. The faint smell of gasoline still lingering. In the air, the fact that Rex had growled before even stepping inside someone else had been there, and they had left in a hurry. "Hey, I don't want no trouble, all right?" Monroe narrowed his eyes at the man in front of him. Henry Wallace, a homeless man in his late 50s, had been living in a makeshift shelter just a few blocks from the abduction site. He was the only potential witness, but getting information out of him was proving to be difficult. "We're not here to arrest you," Henry Monroe said. Calmly, "We just need to know what you saw." The older man shifted uncomfortably, pulling his ragged coat tighter around his thin frame. His fingers fidgeted with the zipper as he glanced around, clearly nervous. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he muttered. Monroe leaned in slightly. "Try me." Henry let out a long sigh, rubbing his face. There were two of them. Monroe's pulse quickened to what? To Van, Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone keeps talking about the one that took the girl Emily, right? The one that guy Hale was driving. But there was another one that night." Monroe felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. "Another van." Henry nodded black. "No markings pulled up a few minutes after the first one. I didn't think much of it at first, figured it was just some delivery truck or something. But then," he hesitated. "Then what?" Monroe pressed. Henry swallowed hard. "I saw the driver get out for a second. Just enough for me to see something. Something on his arm." "What was it?" The old man's gaze darted around before he finally spoke. "A tattoo." He whispered, "A snake wrapped around a number 89. A chill shot through Monroe's veins. That symbol, he had seen it before. The Serpents. A criminal syndicate that had terrorized the West Coast over a decade ago. Human trafficking, drugs, weapons. The works. The FBI had dismantled most of their operations in a series of massive raids. 10 years ago, dozens of high-ranking members had been arrested, and the rest had either disappeared or gone underground. But if Henry was telling the truth, the Serpents weren't just still active. They were back at FBI headquarters. Monroe paced the length of the evidence room, his mind racing. "Tell me you found something," he said to Agent Lisa Carter of the team's cyber specialist. Lisa adjusted her glasses, scrolling through data on her monitor. "You're not gonna like this." Monroe exhaled sharply. "Just lay it on me." Lisa turned the screen toward him. "That tattoo Henry described. It's real. The Serpents used it as a rank marker. 89 refers to one of their highest-tier operatives, meaning whoever Henry saw was a top-level member." Monroe clenched his jaw, and Lisa hesitated, "And I ran some financial checks on Hale. Something's off." She clicked a few times, pulling up another document. For the past 3 years, Hale's bank account received monthly wire transfers from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The amounts varied, but always within the range of $5 to $110,000. Monroe's stomach twisted. "So he was getting paid," he muttered. Lisa nodded. "Yeah. And guess what? The account that was sending him money. It belongs to a shell corporation. One that was flagged years ago in connection to you." "Guessed it." The Serp Monroe inhaled sharply. Hale wasn't acting alone. Looks that way. That changed everything. Richard Hale had been convicted. But what if he was just a pawn? What if he wasn't the mastermind, but simply a tool used by someone more powerful? And what if the Serpents were still in business, still trafficking children and still operating under the radar? Monroe ran a hand through his hair. Damn it. He thought of Emily Carter, the little girl who had barely survived Hale's clutches. Thought of Noah Mitchell, who was still out there somewhere, scared, alone, waiting for someone to find him. And then he thought of Rex. How the dog had reacted near that abandoned warehouse. How he had sensed something no one else could. Something told Monroe that Rex wasn't just remembering the past. He was warning them about the future. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The old case files were spread out across Monroe's desk, papers, overlapping highlighted notes scrawled in the margins. The deeper he dug into Richard Hale's history, the more convinced he became. Hale wasn't the real threat, he was merely a piece of a much larger puzzle. And then there was Joseph Kleen, a name that had resurfaced in his investigation. A ghost from the past. Kleen had spent years on the FBI's radar, but had somehow managed to slip through the cracks every time he had been accused of everything from arms dealing to human trafficking, but nothing had ever stuck. Now he was back, and if Monroe's instincts were right, he was the one pulling the strings. Rex's ears perked up as Monroe stepped out of the elevator into the FBI's main operations floor. The German shepherd sat alert beside Lisa Carter, tail flicking anxiously as his handler approached. "He's been restless," Lisa noted, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Ever since we left the crime scene last night," Monroe crouched, meeting the dog's sharp amber gaze. "You know something's wrong, don't you, buddy?" Rex let out a soft whine, nudging Monroe's hand. Monroe rose to his feet. "Then let's find out what Joseph Kleen," Monroe said, tossing a thick file onto the conference table. "Agent Patrick Reed." The FBI's top profiler leaned forward, flipping through the documents. "Former military," he mused, "special ops discharged under suspicious circumstances. Spent the next decade running security for all sorts of scumbags. Cartels, human traffickers, you name it." Monroe nodded. "And take a look at this." He slid a printed bank statement across the table for the last 3 years. Richard Hale received monthly WI transfers, the sender a shell corporation tied to the Serpents. Reed exhaled sharply. "You think Hale was working for them?" "I think he was their errand boy," Monroe corrected, "and I think Kleen is the one who gave the orders." Lisa, who had been quietly typing away at her laptop, suddenly stiffened. "Guys, we might have a problem." "What is it?" Monroe asked. She turned the screen toward them. A security footage still filled the display. This was taken 2 days before Emily Carter was kidnapped. Lisa explained. Monroe's stomach clenched as he took in the image. It was a grainy shot taken from a gas station camera, but the details were unmistakable. A man standing near the pumps dressed in dark tactical gear, a jagged scar running down his cheek. Joseph Kleen, and he was less than a mile from Emily Carter's house. Monroe pulled his SUV to a stop outside the rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. The FBI had traced Klein's movements over the past month, and everything pointed to this location. "He's in room 207. Lisa confirmed over the earpiece. Monroe checked his sidearm. "Let's do this." Rex moved beside him as they made their way up the stairs, his nose twitching as he picked up scents. Only he could understand the dog's muscles were tense, his instinct screaming that something wasn't right. Monroe felt it too. He raised a fist, signaling the team to halt outside the door. Silence. Then a crash from inside. "Move," Monroe barked. Kicking the door open, the room was empty except for a single chair. Overturned a rope, still dangling from its armrests. Kleen had been here recently, and on the mirror, written in red marker, were 4 chilling words. "You're too late." Agent Monroe paced outside the motel, frustration simmering beneath his skin. "He knew we were coming," Reed muttered, staring at the message on the mirror. Lisa tapped furiously on her laptop. "I'm running traffic cam footage now. If he left in a car, I might be able to track him." Monroe's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a blocked number, frowning. He answered Monroe. Silence. Then a voice, distorted, mechanical. "You're chasing Shadow's agent." "Monroe." Monroe's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. Darkly. The man you're looking for isn't running, he's watching. Monroe felt his pulse, hammer in his throat. Where is Noah Mitchell? The voice ignored the question. You think Hale was the problem. You think clean is the answer. A pause. Then almost amused. You're not seeing the full picture. Monroe's mind raced. What do you want? The voice went quiet for a long moment, then asked the girl. The line went dead. Monroe stared at the phone, his blood running cold. Emily Carter. What did she know? The Carter residence was quiet. The evening sun, casting long shadows across the front yard. Monroe knocked on the door a moment later. Sarah Carter answered, worry etched into her features. Agent. Monroe. I need to speak with Emily, he said gently. Sarah hesitated. She's been having a hard time? I know, Monroe said. But this is important. Sarah sighed, stepping aside. Emily sat on the couch, hugging a stuffed rabbit to her chest. She looked up as Monroe entered, her small hands gripping the toy a little tighter. Hey, Emily, he said, softly. I need your help. The little girl didn't respond, but her gaze flickered toward him. Monroe crouched beside her. Do you remember? Richard Hale. Emily nodded slowly. Monroe took a breath. Was he alone that night? Emily blinked, her grip on the rabbit tightened. Then finally she shook her head. Monroe felt his heart pound. There was someone else. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Monroe pulled a photo from his pocket. The grainy image of Klein. From the gas station he placed it in front of her. Was it this man? Emily studied the picture. Then slowly she shook her head. Monroe felt a chill run down his spine. Emily, he said carefully. Can you tell me what he looked like? The little girl didn't speak. Instead, she reached for a crayon and a piece of paper. She began to draw. Monroe watched, his pulse steady. But his mind racing, a figure took shape. A man. A tall man. And then she added something that made Monroe's breath catch in his throat. A mask. The drawing was crude, but unmistakable. The man Emily had seen wasn't clean. He was someone else. Someone they hadn't identified. Someone still out there watching, waiting. The warehouse stood at the edge of town, its rusted metal siding blending into the overcast sky. It had been abandoned for years at least. That's what the record said. But Monroe had learned that places like these had a way of keeping secrets. Rex's ears twitched as he sniffed the air, his posture tense. This is the place. Lisa Carter confirmed, glancing at the GPS on her tablet. Surveillance picked up Joseph Clean here multiple times over the past few months. Whatever he's been hiding, it's inside. Monroe adjusted his bulletproof vest, exchanging a glance with Patrick Reed. Let's move the team. Advance their weapons. Drawn. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the distant hum of traffic. On the highway, Monroe reached the side door and tested the handle locked. He nodded at Lisa, who stepped forward with a small device. A quiet beep, a faint click, and the door eased open. The darkness inside swallowed them whole. The air. Inside, the warehouse was thick with dust and something else. Something more. Sinister. Monroe's flashlight swept across the room. Stacks of old wooden crates, broken down machinery, and discarded office furniture cluttered the space. But it was the basement door that made his stomach tighten. It was reinforced, new locks. This place wasn't abandoned. It was being used. Lisa knelt beside the control panel, typing rapidly. This isn't just a lock. It's a biometric scanner. Can you bypass it? Monroe asked. Lisa hesitated. I can try. Rex let out a low growl, his nose pressed against the crack beneath the door. His body was stiff muscles, coiled like a spring. There was something on the other side, something bad. 15 minutes later, Lisa stepped back. Got it. The lock clicked open. Monroe raised his weapon and pushed the door wide. The basement was cold, not just from the underground chill, but from the weight of something unseen. Something wrong. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were boxes, dozens of them. Reed pulled one down, flipping it open. His face went pale inside. Were files, photographs, names, and dates. Monroe's pulse hammered as he scanned the documents. Each one contained a missing child's information. Some were recent, others went back years. And then a single sheet of paper different from the rest. A list. 15 names. Emily Carter, Emma Sullivan, and 13 others. Some names had been crossed out. Monroe's stomach churned. Are these? Lisa cut him off. If the names crossed don't mean what I think they do. She swallowed. Followed. Some of these kids are already dead. Monroe clenched his fists and the others. Lisa hesitated, still unaccounted for. That meant they were still alive for now. Then, they found the hard drive. It was hidden behind a panel on the wall wrapped in a plastic bag. Monroe wasted no time plugging it into Lisa's laptop. The files were encrypted, but one folder wasn't inside, were audio recordings. Monroe clicked the first file. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. Hail the Carter girl. Is secured. A pause. Then another voice. Deeper. Colder. Unknown man. Good transport. Her to the next location. Monroe's breath caught. That's him. Lisa stared at the screen. The voice from your phone call. Monroe nodded the masked man. Reed frowned. What the hell does next location mean? Monroe's mind raced. If Emily had been meant to be transported, but Hale got caught before it could happen. Then there were other kids, and they might still be in danger. The next recording made Monroe's blood run cold. Unknown man. The FBI is closing in. We're burning everything. Hale and the others. A beat of silence. Unknown man. Eliminate them. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Monroe shot to his feet. We need to move now outside. The sky had darkened. The wind carried a distant siren, an eerie soundtrack to the horror they had just uncovered. Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Her face drained of color. Monroe. She held up her screen. A new message. No number. No sender. Just 2 words. Too late. Monroe felt his stomach drop. The chain of shadows wasn't just some organization. It was still watching, and they were already one step ahead. The cold wind cut through the air as Monroe and his team raced toward the old dockyard. At the outskirts of the city, rain lashed against the windshield of the SUV, the wipers barely keeping up as water streaked across Ross. The glass Lisa sat in the passenger seat, her fingers flying over the keyboard of her laptop, decrypting the final fragments of data from the hard drive. The message had been clear too late, but Monroe refused to believe it. Joseph Clean had led them to the truth. Whether he had meant to or not, his capture had unraveled a network far more intricate than anyone had imagined. Hale was never the mastermind, he was just another pawn in a much bigger game. And the real threat was still out there. Rex sat in the back seat, his body tense, ears twitching at every sound he could sense it. The air was thick with something dangerous, something unseen. Monroe knew. Better than to ignore the instincts of a trained K9. Lisa suddenly stiffened. Monroe. Stop the car. He slammed on the brakes, tires skidding against the slick pavement. She turned her screen toward him, her face pale. The warehouse. It's on fire. Monroe's gut twisted as he followed her gaze out the window in the distance. A dark column of smoke rose into the stormy sky. The warehouse they had been headed toward. The one Clean had used was burning. Someone was covering their tracks. Monroe gritted his teeth and floored the gas when they arrived. The flames had already consumed most of the structure. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood, and melted metal. Firefighters were battling the inferno. But it was clear, the evidence inside was being erased. Rex barked sharply, straining against his harness as Monroe held him back. He was trying to pull toward the far side of the building. Something's there. Monroe muttered, following the dog's lead through the smoke and flickering flames. He saw it a single metal door, untouched by the fire. Lisa noticed it too. That's reinforced steel. Whatever was inside, they didn't want it destroyed. Monroe didn't hesitate. He kicked the door once, twice, until it gave way, swinging open with a metallic groan inside. The air was hot and filled with smoke, but the sight before them was clear. A chair overturned, a broken set of handcuffs still attached to its armrests. Someone had been here and they had escaped. Monroe's radio crackled. "Sir, we've got something suspect at the airport attempting to board a private jet. Joseph Clean." Monroe's blood ran cold. "We're on our way." They reached the airport in record time. The private terminal was nearly deserted except for a handful of security personnel and the flashing lights of FBI vehicles, and in the center of it, all restrained and smirking, was Joseph Clean. The moment Monroe stepped out of the SUV, Clean's gaze locked onto him. "You made it just in time." Klein said, his voice almost amused, but not for the right thing. Monroe ignored him and signaled for Lisa to search him. She did, turning up nothing but a burner phone, a wad of cash, and a fake passport. "I have to admit," Klein continued, stretching against his restraints, "you're persistent, but you still don't get it. Do you?" Monroe clenched his jaw. "What?" Clean chuckled darkly. "That you're wasting your time." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You think you've won. You think catching me means this is over." Monroe narrowed his eyes. "It means you won't hurt anyone else." Klein's smirk widened me. He tilted his head. "I was never the one you should have been chasing." A cold chill crawled up Monroe's spine. Then, "Who?" Klein's expression shifted. It was almost pitying. "Oh, Agent Monroe, he's already watching you." Lisa stiffened beside him, who Clean exhaled, then smiled as if he knew something. They didn't ask the girl. Monroe's stomach sank. Emily Carter. She was the only one who had been in Hale's captivity, the only one who might have seen something. Someone that Hale had never mentioned, someone more powerful before. Monroe could press further. His phone vibrated, a new message. No sender. Just 4 words. "We are not done." Later that night, Monroe stood outside Sarah Carter's house. The porch light cast a faint glow over the front yard. Illuminating the damp grass from the evening rain, he could hear the muffled sounds of the TV inside, the soft hum of life moving forward. But the case wasn't over, not yet, and had started drawing again. Monroe had seen some of her sketches, scenes of her memories of the room she had been trapped in. At first, they were all the same. The cold walls, the dark shadows. But then one detail changed. A new figure appeared in the background. A man, tall, standing in the doorway, watching. His face was obscured, but his presence was unmistakable. And in the latest sketch, the one Emily had drawn just last night, something new was added. A mask. Monroe exhaled, slowly, staring at the dark horizon. Rex sat beside him, silent but alert. He could feel it too. The real monster was still out there, and the game was far from over. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.